The next morning, she woke up to find flowers on her bedside table, a gesture of apology from Okoye. He had left her a note. "I'm sorry for last night. I love you. Always remember that." One afternoon, after another argument about her spending too much time with the chief guard, Adako finally snapped. "I can't live like this, Okoye. You are suffocating me. I'm not your prisoner," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You think I don't know you meet with other women? It hurts me. But I remind myself I'm not married to you. Yet you are the first to throw accusations around." Okoye fumed with anger, not denying the allegation. "Yes, I'm with other women. I'm a man. I can be with other women without developing feelings for them. But a woman can't do that." "Why?" "Because a man is an angel with no ungodly emotions," Adako asked. Okoye, who had been pacing the room in anger, stopped. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment there was silence. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He walked over to her, pulled her close and held her tight. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice filled with guilt. "I don't know why I'm like this. I don't want to hurt you, Adako, but most times I end up hurting you anyway. Please, don't leave me." Adako stood frozen, her body pressed against his. She wanted to push him away, to tell him how much his control and jealousy were killing her inside. But instead, she found herself melting into his embrace. She hated herself for it, but a part of her still loved him, no matter what. As time passed, Adako grew used to the cycle. Okoye's jealousy would flare up, they would fight, and then he would apologize with gifts and sweet words. And each time, she found herself falling back into his arms, even when she knew it wasn't healthy. What scared her the most was that she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape anymore. She feels empty whenever he's away for days or more. One evening, they sat together in the grand living room of the mansion. Adako's head was on Okoye's chest. It was one of those rare moments when things felt almost normal, just peaceful. "Babe," she began softly, tracing her fingers along his arm. "You've made enough money now. More than enough. Why don't you invest it? Start something new. Something clean. Leave this life behind. Stop hurting people." His eyes narrowing as he looked down at her. "Leave this life behind. And do what? Open a shop or run a business? You don't understand, my love. This is all I know. I didn't get here by playing nice with the world." "But you can change, Okoye," she insisted, sitting up to face him. "You've built something incredible. You have the resources to start afresh. You don't have to keep running and hiding. What's the point of having all this money if you are always looking over your shoulder?" He leaned back, folding his arms. "It's not that simple. Once you get involved in this world, you don't just walk away. There are ties, obligations, and enemies. You think I can just flip a switch and pretend none of this ever happened? I'll be a target. You have no idea how ruthless these people are. They will come for me." "But don't you want a life where you don't have to worry about all that?" Adako insisted. "You could have peace, a family, a future that isn't ruled by fear." He shook his head. "Peace? That's luxury for people who haven't had to fight for everything. Not someone like me." Adako felt for him, trying to understand the weight of his reality. He leaned forward, cupping her face in his hands. "I'm not just some petty criminal, Adako. I've built this life out of nothing. But it's also a life full of danger. I can't let down my guard, not even for a second." Before she could respond, he kissed her deeply, then stood up, grabbed his jacket and left the room, leaving Adako sitting there, feeling sorry for him. Moments later, as Adako sat by the large window, staring out at the distant city, Okoye walked up behind her. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and for a moment, it seemed like everything was normal. But then he spoke, his voice low but scary. "You know, Adako, there is only one way out of this for you." She tensed, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously, turning to look at him. "The only way you leave me is through death. I would rather see you dead than let someone else have you. You belong to me, Adako, forever." Adako tried to swallow the fear rising in her throat, but it was no use. She had known for a long time that Okoye's love was dangerous, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. Adaku, her breath shallow, looked up at him, her voice trembling. "I'm not trying to leave, Okoye. You have me. I've stayed, haven't I?" "Good," he said. As their twisted relationship continued, Okoye's activities didn't go unnoticed. The police had been hunting his gang for months, and their grip on the city tightened. One fateful evening, as the moon hung high in the sky, there was a sudden commotion outside. Adaku heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder and closer. Her heart raced. She looked over at Okoye, who stood by the window, his expression darkening. "They found us," he muttered under his breath, grabbing his gun from the wardrobe. The mansion erupted into chaos. Guards scrambled to lock down the place, but it was too late. The authorities had closed in. Adaku stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to run, to escape while she could, but another part of her was still tied to Okoye, so she was unable to move. "Adaku, come with me," Okoye barked, grabbing her hand roughly. He pulled her toward the back of the mansion, where an escape route had been planned in case of emergencies. But before they could reach the exit, the doors busted open and armed police stormed the mansion. "Get down!" one of the officers shouted, his gun pointed directly at them. Okoye, ever defiant, raised his weapon, but Adaku screamed, "No, don't!" She grabbed his arm, pulling him back, trying to stop him from doing something reckless. For a moment their eyes met, and in that split second, Adaku saw the man behind the monster. He wasn't just the cruel and controlling kidnapper anymore. He is the love of her life, as absurd as that may sound. "She's innocent. She's one of my captives whom I turned to my bedmate. Ensure her safety till she reunites with her family." He hugged Adaku and shot himself in the head. Okoye fell to the ground. Adaku dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the wound, trying to stop the blood from pouring out. "No, no, no!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." But Okoye's eyes were already glazing over. "Adaku," he whispered, his voice weak. "They check in my safe. Your name is the password. Goodbye, my love." And then he was gone. In the days that followed, Adaku was in custody. The authorities questioned her endlessly, trying to understand her role in the kidnappings and her relationship with Okoye. Her family came to see her, but they barely recognized the woman sitting before them. She wasn't the same Adaku who had been taken months ago. She was broken, confused, and lost. Her mother, eyes filled with tears, asked the question Adaku had been dreading. "Why didn't you leave? Why did you stay with him?" Adaku didn't have an answer. How could she explain the complicated mess of emotions that had kept her tied to Okoye? How could she tell them that she loved him even after everything he had done and kept doing? Eventually, the authorities realized she hadn't been a willing participant in the crimes. They believed she had been manipulated, held against her will, and trapped in a toxic relationship. After her release, she was sent to therapy. Her therapist explained that she had likely suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological condition where hostages develop feelings for their captors as a way to cope with their trauma. Adaku frowned. "Stockholm Syndrome?" she echoed, the term unfamiliar to her. The therapist nodded. "It's a psychological condition that affects people who have been held captive or trapped in an abusive situations. It's named after a famous case in Sweden where hostages in a bank robbery ended up sympathizing with their captors. In your case, Adaku, is the reason you stayed with Okoye even when you had the chance to leave." Adaku shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But I loved him. I really did," she whispered. She hated admitting it, but it was the truth. Or at least, it felt like the truth at the time. The therapist leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "I understand that's what it felt like. But love, real love, doesn't come with chains or threats. What you experienced was a complex mix of fear, manipulation, and survival. Okoye controlled you by keeping you scared, and he also gave you just enough kindness to make you feel attached to him. That's part of how men like that operate. The therapist continued, her voice calm but firm. Many women who are trapped in toxic relationships feel the same way. They know they are being hurt, but they hold on to the good moments, the promises, and the charm. The men in these relationships are experts at manipulating emotions. They will shower their victims with love one day and tear them down the next day. It's a cycle of control. Adaku blinked back more tears. But why didn't I say it? Why didn't I realize what he was doing to me? The therapist smiled gently. Because you were in survival mode. Your brain was doing what it needed to do to keep you alive. As the weeks went by, Adaku began to slowly untangle herself from the emotional web that Okoye had spun around her. But healing wasn't a straight path. There were days when she found herself missing him, especially the way he would soften after their fights. There were nights when she would wake up, her heart aching with the absence of him. It was confusing and painful. Slowly, Adaku learned to rebuild her life, which is now better than what she had before the captivity. Though she used part of the money to rebuild her life, but the bulk of the money she gave to charity. She reconnected with her family and rediscovered parts of herself that had been lost during her time with Okoye. She came to understand, even though it was love, it was a toxic love, and she was finally happy to be out of it.